Welcome to the Spirit Underground podcast with Dharma teachers Spring Washam and Lama Rod Owens. These conversations will include topics on Black liberation theology, healing with plant-based medicine, indigenous wisdom, Buddhist-based meditation practices, and reconnecting to our ancestral knowledge. Together we will explore what freedom means individually, collectively, and spiritually. If you would like to support the Spirit Underground podcast, please visit the BeHereNowNetwork.com/donate.
All right. Welcome back to season 2 of the Spirit Underground podcast. This is Lama Rod, and I am joined by my spiritual wife.
Oh, spiritual wife. Yes, Spring Washam.
Spiritual, emphasize spiritual.
Emphasize spiritual. Yes, you have said that. You're getting more warmed up to that title, spiritual wife.
It was just dropped on me recently, so.
It's just a lot, it's a lot.
It's a lot, yeah. But it's fine. It's fine. Spiritual partnership. Yeah.
Spiritual co-collaborator.
Yes.
And I think it's really interesting when we have these friendships that, that we call each other, we're giving birth to something. We're like the parents of something. I think that's maybe, but we're not ready for like mother, father. So
no, I'm not going to start calling you mother. I find that weird. You ever hear people that refer, like a couple that refers to each other as mother and father?
It's a little intense. I don't know what that's about fully, but I get it. Some people call their husband daddy or their mama. I don't know. We start getting into this other area that gets confusing. Yeah. So welcome back, everybody. As Lama Rod has said, this is our season 2. We've taken a little break, but we are back with some content that we think will be exciting and also thought-provoking. Man, we're in some deep times right now.
We are. Yeah, this is like systemic breakdown, collapse, right? And we're seeing it everywhere. I mean, the cost of living, first of all, and rents and more. It's really out of control, right? Price of food, fuel, healthcare, right? On top of just being in this election cycle, right? And once again, we're in an election where it's like everything is balancing on, a thread, how whatever that statement is like everything is just like depending on this one election again.
Yeah, it's like how did we get back full circle? It was like we did we not get the lesson? Are we not getting the teaching in this? We have to do round 2 and then we have to go through, this cycle of choosing.
Yeah.
Which feels like the choices so painful. So painful.
And it feels like if we're always teetering on the brink of collapse, then is it really a healthy democracy or a democracy at all? Right? And if it's always on the brink, it feels like it's just ready to jump off. And it feels like, okay, do over.
Yeah, but who gets to make the new rules? I think that's the big question, right? If this system falls down, who's creating the new one, or do we just keep replicating the same? That's really the nature of samsara, right? We're stuck in this matrix. We just keep doing the same things over and over, creating the same 2 candidates, the same dilemma, the same breakdown. But I hear you. This feels really like, oh my gosh, like there's something more serious about this cycle. We got everything is on the line, environmental and human and every system possible feels like it is, like healthcare, financial, everything feels like it's just like it's jello,
Yeah.
it's nothing feels solid.
Yeah. Yeah. And I for a while, for years actually, I was always talking about apocalypse, like unveiling, truth telling, which is very hard to hold. Telling the truth is like, oh shit, this is what's happening. Okay. And what am I going to do about it? But for me, it's more than just a falling apart or an unveiling. For me, it's really this period of like decolonization, and that of course feels extremely painful, like that. When we actually have to do the work of healing, but part of that healing means that there are systems that really have to be abolished, that have to kind of fall apart, which is really a cycle of nature. Like there can't be something new unless the old thing, you know is, kind of like, I don't know, recycled, or falls apart, right? Like that renewal cycle of nature. I mean, it's the same thing I feel like it's happening. Like I really deeply feel like we're being renewed. Like, and this
Right.
is the
Yeah.
part, and you have to die, right? To get renewed, right? Or you have to die to be resurrected, or I think about the phoenix and like the mythology of the phoenix has to burn and then from the ashes re-arises into something new and vibrant, right? I see so many of these patterns happening, but that doesn't do anything to really really help people to show up to the real struggle that we're moving through, the perpetual genocides and wars, right? Still, the genocide, the Palestinians, right? And the complicity of so many people, in that genocide, which and the occupation, of Palestine, something that I have felt personally for years, like that kind of deep solidarity where yet again another community of color being occupied and dominated in the same way I feel as if our community has been occupied and dominated for centuries. Just feeling that continuation, but also saying when is enough enough and what do we need to do to disrupt this, but also placing that into the context of like decolonization, like what does all of this mean, right? As we're facing yet this really intense, critical moment in history for us.
Yeah. And I think what we're seeing too is the a civil war. We're seeing the America that we know has always been divided, right? We've
Hmm.
fought
Hmm.
this battle before over
Hmm.
values.
Yeah.
Are we a human based
Hmm.
society? Do we
Hmm.
value that? Do we value um, a real freedom and liberation for everyone, or is it just the few? So I get
Hmm.
this deeper level of the decolonization. I mean, we had one civil war, but it feels like the
Hmm.
energy, like I can
Hmm.
hear
Hmm.
the music, like
Hmm.
that Dixie soundtrack is this in my mind
Hmm.
as we have these elected officials. And I just saw something, and I don't watch the news. I just read
Hmm.
headlines,
Yeah.
and it was like calling for a war tribunal against
Hmm.
somebody who disagreed with you. Now we
Yeah.
want to put them in military court. And that's,
Hmm.
I think maybe this Americans against other Americans. And
Hmm.
it is about ideas. It's a
Hmm.
battle of that.
Hmm.
The ideas that we hold, and what kind of world we want to see.
Hmm.
And that's what I think feels so challenging,
Yeah.
is like, how do you disrupt this war of ideas when
Hmm.
people's beliefs
Hmm.
are so fundamentally different? There is this line,
Hmm. Hmm.
that feels like we're being asked to step over. You're on
Yeah.
this side, you're on that side.
Yeah.
And And it does feel like this old system is going, this
Mhm.
old,
Mhm.
capitalism and
Yeah. Yeah.
patriarchy and racism. I mean, it's so obvious,
Mhm.
right? It's so,
Well,
but what is the new system and
right.
who's holding that?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I don't see this leadership being held in any place
Hmm.
in at least not in the US Capitol right
Yeah.
now.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it's all of that, and for me, it's ideas, but even more specifically, it's ethics. It's ethical frameworks
Mm,
and different people have different ethics, right? And I think the ethical framework that we're rooted in, of course, which is rooted in Buddhism, right? And abolition is that everyone deserves to be free.
yes.
Right. Everyone needs to be free. Everyone needs to have access to the resources that they need to be well and safe and happy. That you don't have to earn a right to be fed and housed, and
Right.
cared for and clothed. Like, this isn't about the nature of your character. This is about the fact that you are a human living in culture and society. And as a society, we should care for one another, right? We should be practicing a deep liberatory empathy, right? That extends care to everyone, right? And but we struggle with how these systems have come along to indoctrinate, how we view people as being worthy of care and safety and resources, right? And that's what people really, for me, that's what I see people really struggling against. It's like this idea of like fairness, you know,
Right.
like,
Fairness. Yes, absolutely.
which
It's
is
basic.
capitalism.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, why does somebody always have to be on the top, and why does
Hmm.
someone always have to be on the bottom?
Yeah.
And why can't we have this shared,
Yeah.
world? Why can't we
Yeah.
share things? And this is,
Hmm.
I guess, why people create the story of socialism to disrupt that narrative of kindness and sharing. And
Hmm.
I mean, there's just so much happening. So I'm trying to think of
Yeah.
people who are tuning in, right?
Yeah.
All of our spiritual practitioners and
Hmm.
listeners from all
Hmm.
over the world.
Hmm.
It seems so impossible to hold this period.
Yeah.
It's like there's a hourglass, right? And the
Hmm.
sands are ticking towards something. We all feel it.
Hmm.
I'll be really honest with you.
Mm.
Yesterday, I had a tremendous amount of anxiety for hours about the world yesterday.
Wow.
I felt this deep, deep pain in my belly. I was thinking about everything that is happening and the hurricanes in the Caribbean and the wars in the Middle East and the
Mhm.
rhetoric that
Yeah.
is just nonstop and
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
in the media world is just destruction right now. Maybe
Yeah.
that's part of it. That's the frequency of we know it's
Mm.
falling because that's
Mhm.
all that's amplified is
Mhm.
everything that's
Yeah.
literally being torn apart or
Yeah.
being threatened
Yeah.
to be torn apart. And it's so difficult to know what is a compassionate response because it can how do you not
Mhm.
stay in your head and how
Mhm.
do you start to be in your heart and you start to be
Mhm.
in your body with this intense
Yeah.
feeling of uncertainty,
Yeah.
right? We
Yeah.
don't know what is going to happen literally in the next month or
Mhm.
even 3
Nope.
months.
I mean, we don't know what's gonna happen, like, in an hour.
We don't, but we always felt that we had a little more assuredness,
Right.
like, we could
Right.
count on month to month, okay, there's not gonna be
Yeah.
a huge collapse,
Well,
but now it's at the point where it is so insane,
yeah.
that it's
Yeah.
hard to even know how to keep showing up.
Yeah. Well, the illusion of stability,
Yeah.
like, our permanence, like, it's just like our total loyalty and devotion to permanence, right? Everything's just always gonna be the same, right, And then we just make these assumptions, and then the suffering arises when something changes, and we're like, "Shit, what's happening? I thought this was gonna be what I needed it to be, and it's something completely different." Right. But it really goes back to for me, the early stages of my practice when I was coming into the tradition. And in Tibetan Buddhism or Vajrayana Buddhism, we go through the Nundro to begin kind of it's an initiation into the lineage. It's an initiation that takes forever and ever and ever to complete. But the first of the practices of the Nundro is to contemplate, well, the first contemplation is precious human life, like this great, amazing opportunity that we have to be embodied as human, to be able to, be interested, right, in spiritual practice and, some of these values. But then after that, I forget if this is the second or the third, but you get into samsara, this cycle of birth and rebirth. That's really based on delusion, right, and ignorance, right? We're trying to cut through this by awakening compassion and wisdom, or sometimes I say deep care and clarity. And in that contemplation early on in my practice, it was so radical for me to contemplate that this world, this experience of living, yes, yeah, there's suffering here, right? There's a lot of suffering, right? But it's this samsara, this experience, this reality is only doing what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to be difficult and hard because this is a dream that we're having, and this is not what we truly are, right? And until we wake up and remember what we are, this is what we have to deal with, right? And that really got so much together for me early in my practice. I let go of expecting this world to be a utopia, right? But that's not to say that I still, don't believe that it needs to be a complete hell realm, right? Either, right?
Right.
But there's still always going to be suffering. There's always going to be conflict and war and all of this, right? And I was like, okay, great. If that's what's happening, then I need to get clear about what it means to get free from this, right?
Right.
And then just over all these years, over 20 years of practice at this point, I was just actually thinking about this today earlier because I was teaching, I was just really thinking about how far I've come and and at this point in my practice, how realistic I am. I guess another way of saying it, I've been checking in with how much I'm able to tell the truth about this experience, right?
Mm.
Not just tell the truth, but accept it, right? Just say, yeah, this is happening. I don't have to like it. And I don't like a lot of it. I don't have to love it. Well, I'll back that up. Let me take that off the plate for now. I don't have to like it. I don't have to celebrate it, but I have to tell the truth. This is what's happening, right? Because if we tell the truth, then we can get to the suffering that perpetuates, right, so much of this violence, right? And that suffering is really based on this lack of belief in what we really are, that we're already awakened beings, but we kind of forgot that. And now we're kind of wrapped up in this delusion that's centered around the sense of self, which is really just an experience of just overwhelming contraction and
Mhm.
constriction
And
and
grasping.
rigidity and grasping,
Right.
which just
Mm.
feels intense, right? And then we react to that experience, and that reaction is just really a weaponizing, of our suffering, right? And one of the ways that we weaponize it is just through, you know, um, wanting to be, well, comfortable, right? Even at the expense of others that we force to experience discomfort, right? Which for me, helps me to understand oppression, right?
Mhm.
One group wants to be comfortable and they manipulate and oppress other groups to maintain that discomfort while creating narratives about why they deserve
Right. They
to be kept,
rationalize their
right?
views and why they have to make those decisions.
And then they get into normalizing. It's like I'm inherently better and deserve more than this group, or these people, right? And then that normalization makes the whole system invisible, So we get into like these systems of racial hierarchies, right? And racial capitalism that seem natural, but actually they're just over normalized to the extent that we no longer know how to name them. Well, some people don't know how to name them, which is where anti-racism, right, emerges from. It's the work to start naming these hierarchies and disrupting them,
which has
right?
been really powerful and
Mm-hmm.
really happening. And it's that anti-racism movement is really, it's in the mycelium, group after
Mm-hmm.
group, person
Mm-hmm.
after person, family member to family member. Like this disruption, I really feel like has been happening since 2020,
Yeah.
right? On the deepest level. So
Yeah.
is this somehow our collective, are we all dreaming this collective
Yeah.
test? Or is
Mm-hmm.
this whole collapse
Mm-hmm.
truly about colonization and decolonization? It feels like it. I mean, can it be that simplified on some level?
Well, I mean,
I mean,
everything's
nothing ever
super
is that
simple,
simple,
right?
but in a way, it is like
Yeah.
this paradigm,
Yeah.
yeah, being challenged and questioned,
Yeah.
and us not refusing to participate
Yeah.
with our hearts and our minds and our bodies.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it does take two to tango. It takes the oppressed and the oppressor going in
Mhm.
that dance,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so the more the oppressed go, wait a minute,
Yeah.
and they
Mhm.
start pulling these programs
Yeah.
out and
Mhm.
disrupting
Mhm.
the system, right? We're
Yeah.
just not following along. People aren't back at work the way they were
Mm.
before.
Mhm.
People aren't following
Yeah.
other people's rules. It seems like at the
Mhm.
same rate. There
Mhm.
was something happened after COVID and during COVID
Mm.
and
Mhm.
before COVID. Obviously,
Mhm.
there was a buildup, but it felt like a substantial shifting about
Yeah.
what people are loyal to,
Yeah.
right? And what systems they're participating in
Yeah.
economically,
Mhm.
environmentally, and
Mhm.
socially,
Mhm.
like what
Mhm.
am I participating in,
Yeah.
right? That had never felt like a question on the table. People were just in
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
just like just a wheel, the
Mhm.
wheel was just spinning that you're
Mhm.
told to do this and survive and you do it. But
Mhm.
I have appreciated over the last couple of years the amount of people refusing to
Mm.
participate.
Right.
And that has this, I feel like, is that, I wonder,
Mhm.
on a deepest level, is what's creating
Right.
why we're co-creating this moment of collapse, like the lack
Mm.
of
Mhm.
participation, then those who are
Mhm.
beholden to it.
Yeah.
And here we are, right? Who wins?
Yeah. Yeah. And when you kind of study and read how indigenous cultures, and indigenous writers and thinkers, are writing about this period, and how many of these thinkers have been writing about this forever, for centuries, right? Particularly on these lands. One of the things that I've been noticing is that this understanding of colonization as this intense kind of disassociation, right? And that, the oppressor experiences this disassociation. They force that disassociation onto others. And then there's this society, this colonized society that's created where people are so disassociated that they actually don't understand how they're getting wrapped up into these systems like patriarchy, capitalism, which are all deeply interconnected. But these systems, you know, are meaning to keep us away from our bodies. Like it keeps us like disassociated and therefore not in tune with the actual pain
With
and
our
the suffering
hearts.
with our
Yeah, we're like
hearts.
disconnected from our heart. We
Yeah,
disconnect from the feelings
yeah,
that are giving us
yeah.
information.
And when you're disassociated like that, you can carry out all kinds of violence,
Yeah, you're
right?
numb.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a
you're kind of
numbness.
like zombie like.
But I think that, like, no matter how disassociated we are, there's still a deep sense that what's happening is unnatural, right? And that there is a calling back to the body, which for me, I can interpret that as decolonization, to return back to the body, to return back to the trauma and the pain that is occupying our bodies, as trauma, but particularly transhistorical trauma, intergenerational trauma, complex trauma, right? And then, of course, what we're being called to do in that returning is the healing. And I think this is what people are finally beginning to articulate. And of course, not everyone, but like people are beginning to say, no, actually, this is the work. Like, this is an age of like deep healing,
Right.
right?
We're
And how do
opening
I
up
do that?
this.
And how
Hmm.
do I start divesting now from these systems that perpetuate all the trauma as well as the disassociation, right? And people are being called to it. This is why so many people are just like, okay, what does work look like? Right? What does community look like now? What does wellness look like? What does really abolition look like? Right. And I'm seeing that specifically. I know this is super controversial for a lot of people, but I'm seeing this enacted in terms of voting. People are saying, I cannot vote within a system now that is only perpetuating systemic violence, right? And real genocide, real wars, real suffering, right? And that's really like that's where we're at. I'm only, 44, right? In all my years of voting, I've never heard people en masse, saying I refuse to vote, particularly for any presidential, nominee now.
Yeah, it's like not voting is a vote for something. You're
Yeah,
voting by not voting.
yeah,
You're making a statement
yeah.
by consciously saying, I'm not gonna vote. And
Mhm.
I have to say, I mean, I get these like text messages on my phone, these surveys, and I just stare at it. It's like, who are
Yeah,
you gonna vote for? And
yeah,
I just stare,
yeah, yeah.
And I mean, obviously I delete them, but it brings up that
Mhm,
question. Like I really understand
mhm.
those that feel like that. Now
Yeah,
I don't have a response what people should do. They have to
right,
follow their heart. I mean,
exactly.
there's causes
Mhm.
and consequences
Yeah,
for every collective
yeah.
action. But I think I want to highlight a little
Mhm,
bit about this word, go back to this
mhm.
word collective
Mm,
dissociation
mhm,
as almost like an effect of
mhm.
colonization, or
Yeah.
is that, yeah, it's like an effect of brutality,
Mhm,
right?
mhm, mhm.
It's like when we're colonized, we almost have a blackout effect. Like we don't
Yeah.
remember our previous
Mhm,
lives,
mhm,
and often that happens through trauma, right? A
mhm.
community first is taken over and then
Yeah,
sort of, there's this trauma inflicted. And I mean, it's so obvious now, the steps, right?
yeah,
We've seen this in
yeah,
Native communities, and we've seen
yeah.
this in African American communities. We've
Mhm.
seen this in schools along the Mexican border. We've seen that, you know what I mean? We've seen this, these levels
Yeah.
of it's almost so transparent
Mhm,
now. Right? Like
mhm,
the
mhm.
transparency and maybe that's what's creating the collapse too, right? When
Yeah.
you see the game,
Mhm,
you're not playing it anymore. You're like,
mhm,
"Oh, I was invested, but now
mhm,
I see,
mhm.
this isn't gonna get me where I thought I was gonna
Yeah,
get to." Right? We play the game
yeah,
to get we think we're gonna benefit from it
mm,
on some level, consciously or
yeah,
unconsciously.
yeah. I mean, you point out something so important for us to tend to, which again is the loss of memory.
This loss of memory. I
Memory.
get a lot of that imagery also from
Mhm,
Harriet when I'm
mhm.
having moments of writing or reflecting.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
Harriet used to say there's a blackout effect here.
The
It's affecting
forgetfulness.
millions of people. They forgot. It's like
Yeah,
but I think this is what's so powerful about
yeah,
what we're doing as I guess I consider myself a spiritual friend to others, is like
sure.
we're helping each other get back online through our liberation practices, especially through this the awareness, the
Yeah.
meditation, right?
Yeah.
Because we're going from a disassociated state back into a connected state with our body being the ground,
Yes.
and coming
Mhm.
back and asking
Mhm.
our bodies are just, resting in the present moment. And in that present moment, it's like slowly our memories are restored.
Mhm.
That's another
Mhm.
way of we become associated, we
Yeah.
become
Yeah.
embodied
Yeah.
again. And
Yeah.
it's very hard to manipulate a group of people who are present in their bodies.
Exactly, and that's why you wanna get them out of their bodies to control them,
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
same way that was done with our ancestors, right?
Absolutely.
We were stolen, like, from our lands, and then we were forced to let go of our rituals, right, and our ceremonies, and that created, an identity crisis. And in that identity crisis, and I think this is like, it speaks a little bit to like the science around brainwashing, is that like you have people question their identity that creates space for you to plant a
The
new
program.
narrative,
Yeah.
a new program in,
You
right?
give them
Mhm.
the other yeah, you give them a program in that
Yeah,
moment, right?
yeah. Our folks came from the worship and belief of like, well, these deeply indigenous belief systems, with the Orishas and Ifa, and Dagara, people, which I descend from as well. Like we had these deep indigenous beliefs that tied us to the land, to the unseen world, and then we were forced to displace that with this Christianity that was just a mask for white supremacy and domination. Right. And then we were told to hold on to that. But, we held on to it and used it to get free. Like
Yeah, we made
the,
it work
yeah,
somehow in a different
our,
way. Mm.
yeah, our identification with this new narrative actually asked all these other beings like Harriet Tubman to actually adjust to our narrative, right? To come back into the world in a form that looked like us, that thought like us, that embodied our religious and cultural narratives, that we could experience inspiration and excitement from, right?
Right,
You
right.
know, I,
Absolutely.
I find that exciting, but like, yeah, when you force someone to forget who and what they are, then you can control them, right? And
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely, and a big piece of that is by traumatizing them.
yeah,
That adds to it,
the
right?
middle passage,
Mhm, and we talk
like,
about this a lot at the middle passage and this kind
yeah,
of blackout. People arrive, they have
mhm,
no idea what happened to them, and they're
yeah,
completely disassociated.
yeah,
And you do that with people living with trauma all
yeah,
the time.
yeah,
And I guess that's what makes me a little bit worried
mhm,
about, and I try not to worry about the state of the world because I'm not sure it helps, but I have to
right,
feel in my body this
right,
concern, this
yeah,
care for those who, as this system begins to collapse,
yeah,
you know, and who don't know yet how to become embodied.
yeah,
All they know is
yeah,
disassociated, or
right,
maybe they're at the very beginning.
yeah,
This, for a lot of people, will be a traumatic moment. It
mhm,
could be a traumatic moment. There would be all of us that are like redemption and we're like getting liberated, but there would be a
yeah,
group just like during COVID. There's a
yeah,
lot of experiences of that.
mhm,
People had a lot of dip. People loved it, and some people were
yep,
traumatized and
yep,
they had, dealt with death and destruction, and others felt like they found themselves and this is
mhm,
like, but I just, as somebody who, as we try to midwife like so many
mm,
others, so we're like the
mhm,
midwife, right? Something is
mhm,
collapsing, something is trying to be born,
yeah, yeah,
and I just keep wanting to just give people a sense of comfort, but I
yeah,
don't know if we're any of us are gonna be truly
mm,
comfortable.
mhm. And I just feel like too that there are those of us who are ready for this collapse, right? I'm
Okay.
not saying that like we know what to do and how to do it, but I'm saying that like people are ready for a shift in narrative, right? That's
Yes,
part of
I
the
would say that, yeah.
decolonization.
We've been wait some
Yeah,
people waiting a long time, but we just
yeah,
we prayed that it would come through this
yeah,
kind of, like, everybody getting us and understanding
mhm,
us, and then
yeah,
they submit to
yeah,
we visualize it where, like, everyone would understand us, but
yeah,
that's not what this period is calling
mm-mm,
for. It's like, no,
mm-mm,
we don't want this and we don't
yeah,
understand this. We
yeah,
like colonization, we like our power.
that's it.
And so they're choosing,
Mhm,
the self-destruct button. They're going to go out, swinging,
mhm,
kicking, grasping. I think a lot of us had that utopian idea. We'd all come together in some
mhm.
town hall and go, "Wow, I really understand you. Thank you." And like, I get it now, right? All these white people being like, "You're right. My answer," but it's just lies and denial and fight and,
Yeah,
and kill the messengers
yeah,
and
yeah, mhm,
attack each other. It's just going to this
yeah,
level of
yeah,
it's like the level of war. It's the
mhm,
same. It's the level of the war
yeah,
consciousness,
yeah,
and that's just hard. I just want to
mm,
name that
yeah,
because
mhm,
and I don't have to name it. We all see it. We all feel it, but it's a lot to hold for us.
yeah,
It's not gonna at this stage, it's not gonna be that utopian coming together with people who think radically different. It's like, wow, I might have to protect myself
mhm,
because they'll forget we're interrelated,
yeah,
interconnected, and oh,
yeah,
you know, we have to be safe. And so I just sort of hold
yeah,
that,
yeah,
that complexity in my
yeah,
body. My body's trying to
mhm,
hold that.
mhm,
My
mhm,
heart is trying to hold the confusion that
yeah,
people are going to experience on how to react and respond to what is being, you know, demonstrated and the
yeah,
collapse of systems that they may not know how to navigate.
yeah, yeah, and we have to mourn that as well because a lot of people won't, like, be able to manage, right, and to tend
Mhm.
to the impact of the impact of, like, the collapse of these systems because they haven't done the work or attempted to do the work of disidentifying with the system. These we think the systems are what we are, right? Yeah, well, I think about patriarchy, which is like, there's a men's health crisis right now, like a huge one. I'm
Mm.
having these conversations with folks, and there's just lots of writing and thinking is coming out about this. But when you're indoctrinated into a system and you just believe that the system is what you are and who you are, and when that system begins to destabilize, it really feels like you're dying.
Yeah. Or you're being threatened
Yeah,
with death
yeah,
somehow
yeah,
to give up this thought, I'm being threatened. I
yeah,
think that's what provokes people's
yeah,
defense, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, well, if I don't have this, then I guess all I have is my own broken heart and pain to sort through now.
And then you get swallowed up in it. You get absorbed into that brokenheartedness, which people may experience as severe depression, you
Yeah.
know. But I see a lot of men going through this. Like it's this like the collapse of patriarchy, right? Is being felt as a real death,
Oh,
right?
yes, absolutely.
You
The
know.
whole sense of self-esteem
Hmm.
that so many people yeah, I could
Yeah.
see how people wanna hold on to it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know? I could see that actually. It's like holding on to being like the most
Hmm.
popular kid in class, some kinda like
Right. Right.
prom king or whatever, whatever. Like
Yeah.
you have your identity
Yeah.
rooted
Mhm.
and I'm the best,
Yeah.
and to realize that you're not and to
Hmm.
realize that and to face the
Yeah.
effects of the belief system.
Yeah.
It's not only the collapse of it, it's also you start as it's collapsing, you see the futility and the
Mhm.
ramifications and the pattern of destruction with it. And that
Mhm.
also becomes unbearable,
Yes.
right? It's like, any belief system that's false. All
Yeah.
your actions based on it might have
Yeah.
been violent, might have been so hurtful.
Yeah.
When you start to see that too, that also leads to a kind of it can, in those who are not ready, a
Sure.
violence, an inner
Sure.
violence, and then
Yes.
that becomes outer.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely right. And I was reading something really interesting recently about um, the draft, right? So we just I think Congress just passed the bill to reinstate the draft. So
Right.
anyone, you get to, I guess, 18 or 21, one of those, you have to automatically sign up for the draft now. You know, and that was related to something that I was reading about, how when you have a country with a lot of like young men who are feeling kind of lost and depressed,
Mm-hmm.
like that's the root of like coups, and
Yeah,
like, and
absolutely.
so you have to actually channel that energy. Patriarchy has like established itself as a way to channel like the sacred masculine into a rigid, like dominating energy
Yes,
that always
yes.
has to be directed. Because if not, it will collapse back on itself, which is what we're seeing with this men's health crisis. It's not being directed. And so it's falling back on men who we don't necessarily have the capability or the capacity to name what's happening and to do the emotional labor, because the system hasn't made it. The patriarchy um, has made it convenient not for us to have the skills for like deep, transformative emotional labor.
Yeah, and this is
In
why
general, I'm just
yeah,
making a general, a statement.
absolutely.
I'm not saying all men can't do this, right? I'm just saying systemically, this is what this looks
Absolutely.
like, right?
And this is why I know it's so funny, and I just wanna mention something, and I know we're gonna do a show on this, but I
Hmm.
think this is why the psychedelic movement, the military, and MDMA, which is a
Hmm.
heart medicine, a
Yeah.
trauma release, can actually, in a roundabout way, we are going to create a new system of care, right?
Yeah.
You just said, what
Yeah.
is our system of care? And
Hmm.
so, in a weird way, and we'll get into this other conversation on a future show where we talk about psychedelics, could it save the world? Right?
Hmm.
Is this a
Hmm.
possibility if we look at it as a new
Yeah.
healthcare system?
Yeah.
Right? What is our new system? This seems to be arising, but I
Yeah.
just wanted to highlight that because so much of what is pushing the legalization of MDMA forward is the military. That whole
Yes.
military industrial
Hmm.
complex, which none of these men can heal without
Hmm.
accessing their heart and
Yeah.
this deep compassion. They don't have a system. They prior to this, they haven't had a system to address the real wounding, which is not just
Hmm.
about the trauma, but the way they
Hmm.
were the program.
Yeah.
So much of the military is a program of this kind of masculine,
Hmm.
patriarchal influences. Not
Hmm.
everybody in the military has that, but anyway, that's another side note. But that just
Yeah.
I wanted to highlight that because so we're in the middle of these collapses,
Hmm.
patriarchal collapse, economic
Hmm.
collapse, as people are
Hmm.
I don't even know. I think the economic collapse has probably been something that's been looming for, I mean,
Yeah.
I think today I just saw something that was like the debt,
Mhm.
it's so
Mhm.
insane that it's like
Mhm.
who has it's just numbers at this
Mhm.
point. It's so hard to relate to
Yeah.
what is that. It's impossible that will never be paid back, right?
Yeah.
So it's a joke, right?
It
It's
was like
like
student
it can just only
loans
go in
too.
one direction.
Yeah.
There's no way it could
Mhm.
ever turn around. So there
Mhm.
has to be at one point you had to set back to zero,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, these are trillions and beyond. I don't know what the word is beyond trillions, but
Mm.
um
Gazillion. I don't know.
gazillions of dollars and who owes what, we'll never know, right? It's
Mhm.
like, but so I guess a part of me, with this conversation is like, it's kind of helping people prepare for this and name
Mhm.
it, right?
Mhm.
We're in this state, we're in this
Mhm.
collective moment.
Mhm.
it's feeling more imminent every day,
Yeah.
that it's like we're being warned, we're being prepared. But how do people not go into fear? If
Mhm.
you're just someone listening, it's like,
Mhm.
oh, do you go and stack up on beans and toilet paper? Do you,
Right.
you know
Right.
what I mean? Do you
Right.
start cashing out your money
Mhm.
and putting it under your mattress? I mean, or do you start doing compassion
Yeah.
practice? Or do you just, I mean, what is, and maybe this is just a question, like, as we're watching this, you know, I just wonder about
Yeah.
people like,
Well, what's the real fear? And I think the real fear is death.
the real feel is as there'll be our rights will be taken away. There'll be this period of
ultimately, like,
ultimately
we were
the
afraid of
violent
death.
death. Yeah.
Like, I think
Torture and violent death and the loss of everything you
yeah,
love and your
yeah.
family being hurt. We can go into that, but
But I just think that, like, when people are always like, "Oh, I'm afraid," but like, the root of this is death. You're afraid of death because you think that this is it,
right.
and I bring that up because over all these years, I've been working with death, and I'm not really that afraid to die, and because I'm not
Yeah.
afraid to die, I'm just like, if I get killed, in an uprising, fine.
Right.
I'm not interested in preserving my life at the, what's the word? At the expense
Of
of,
preserving a system.
yeah, or just at the expense of other people's lives.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think, I mean, if we really want to talk about real spiritual abolition, then we have to talk about how the world is not our home, and at some point you give up and say, you know what, this is fucks, you know, right? But it doesn't mean I stop caring. It doesn't mean that I'm not helping as much as I can, but it means that, like, yeah, there's an end coming, right? There's real disruption that may result in me transitioning from this world. I need to hold
Mm,
that, right? Because that's part of the way, colonization has us fucked up. Like, we forget that we're dying. Like, we have lost the rituals and the ceremonies that made dying and aging and eldership a natural part of our lives. So it's such a surprise, right? And because it's a surprise, it's like so much suffering. Why is this happening? It's happening because this is what happens. Like, we've lost our honoring and reverence of the cycles of life. And we're obsessed with youth and not aging, and over obsessed with, like, health, right? And yeah, we have to take care of ourselves, we take care of our bodies, we take care of our minds. But again, there's an obsession,
yeah.
like, with avoiding aging and dying. And I'm just like, I can't wait for my elder years, right? Because I've done all this work to open back up to remembering my indigeneity, that I come from indigenous people, like, who honored this, who knew what this was about. So when I talk about people, the anxiety and the fear that we have about the future, I'm just like, well, it's not just about, our access to resources. It's also about our inherent impermanence as well. Like, all of this is on the plate, you know?
Right.
Right? And because I'm in this place with my own death and aging, I have this incredible space to get real creative and fluid with how I am responding to the challenges. Like, it's like, yeah, like, I have, because I'm like, okay, I'm gonna die at some point, then that anxiety is off the table, is off my plate. I'm no longer spending time with,
Worried
like,
about what
pushing
is
over death.
inevitable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I can come back to the present and say, what am I doing now to benefit others and to benefit myself, to support all of us as we move into this future? And whatever happens, happens. Right. And I'm not so concerned with what happens because I'm doing everything that I can to have the intention and the clarity in this moment. right? To choose what feels liberatory, to choose what reduces harm and violence, right? And none of this is perfect,
Right.
and we need to tell this to people, because when things get tight like this, we want to shift into this worship of perfection, and we use perfection as an excuse to do something or not to do something. And people need to understand that, like, this is no longer an age of perfection.
You
Like,
can say that again.
like everything's not
This
going to
is,
line up,
yeah,
you
it's not going to
know?
line up.
Like, we have to understand that, like, we have to deal with the contradictions in the liberation work, right? And I've been having these conversations in multiple countries this year,
Mm-hmm.
where people are like, well, how do we survive if people aren't doing X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, it's not going to be about everyone doing 100% of everything that we need to do to have, like, this abolitionist future. Is about us getting on the same page with doing as much as we can, given the reality of the trauma, that we're carrying, and the capacities that we have at our disposal in this moment. I think so many people are just like, community has to be perfect, right? And that's not, crisis doesn't breed perfection. Crisis breeds collaboration and grace. Right?
That's really beautiful.
I just came up with it. It's
You just
incredible.
say it again.
Okay, what did I say? Okay,
Crisis.
crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to rephrase it. Crisis gives rise to grace and collaboration.
Crisis gives rise to grace and collaboration.
Yeah, and grace itself is like the space that we give things, the way that, like, we hold space and not just react in really rigid ways. It's the way that we're empathizing. Like, grace is like, okay, I get it. Right. I get
Yeah, it's like the willingness to dance with the truth of this
yeah.
life. It's
Yeah.
like, can we be graceful? And I
Yeah.
really, thank you. I think there was something really powerful about this facing death and
Mhm.
facing, it's like we're not here to be at home, we're here to be in school.
Yeah.
It's like the school of
Yeah.
life. It's not
Yeah.
about, you can't
Mhm.
stay here, everybody. No one
Yeah.
ever has been able to,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Unless you're a super sitta
Yeah.
master or some,
Something. Yeah.
then you're not, you have different rules.
You're right.
But for
Mhm.
most of us, we'll have to deal with aging and also deal with our own fear of our
Yeah.
our death, right? And when I hear what you're saying, because there was a fearlessness
Mhm.
when we're okay with dying. There is a space, there is a
Yeah.
grace that opens up to this
Yeah.
life. Like if we're okay, like, if we go out in some
Mhm.
kind of
Mhm.
battle in East Atlanta with the powers that be, it's like, okay, right, we did our best. Okay.
That's it. That's
Yeah,
also
and
it.
that's all that we
Yeah.
can do, and that's the
Do our
game,
best. Yeah.
that's really deep. You do not
Hmm.
hear people talking
Mm-mm.
about this at all. We just
Mm-mm.
leave this whole piece off the table. Is this the realness that we're gonna be getting to, where we're gonna be giving
Yeah.
talks on death and dying
Yeah.
and
That's Buddhism. That's it.
yeah, but it doesn't it doesn't, you don't hear it
Right.
in terms of this liberation.
Right. 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 Right.
You
Right.
hear it with people
No.
90 who are facing that moment. You don't
Yeah.
hear it with, you're 44, you look so good. You look like you could live 100 years. You don't
Exactly.
hear this age group
Exactly.
talking about it as a
Yeah.
liberation practice for apocalypse.
Yeah. Well, I think this is let's bookmark this for a topic for another
Mhm.
episode, like aging, because this is like something I'm always trying to talk about with people, with like my friends who are middle aged now, and just like the discomfort that comes up with it. And like
Yeah.
everyone's so afraid that we just can't sit down and say, okay, we're dying, we're aging, we're no longer in the 90s anymore. Like we're, you
I know
know,
it's hard for me. I know it's hard
yeah,
for I mean, it's a collective one,
yeah,
right? I mean, how much time are we trying to preserve
yeah,
the inevitable? We can't hold it together as long as
you know, exactly, but I like this whole like eldership Two, like, my intention is to embrace eldership, if I can, right? If I
Yeah, you've
live,
always said that. I've always
like, I'm
appreciated.
excited about eldership because I feel like particularly masculine-centered elders, and besides, like, my uncles, like, growing up who are also, or who are also my elders, but I never felt like this community eldership from men, and not
Right.
like I'm queer, gay, right? And so many queer and gay men, the generation before me, um, died, right? They transitioned during the AIDS crisis, right? So I never had gay male eldership, and I need to embody that, which excites me, as well. But when when you choose eldership, then for me, what I've been experiencing as I'm choosing eldership more and more is this certainty, I would say, this certainty around I know a lot. Like,
Right.
I know how to
Mhm.
live. Like, I know I've trained specifically very hard to be a spiritual elder on top of just a community elder, which again, it's embodying the community structure and roles of our ancestors, right? To say, yeah, I have something really important to live for, right? And I think that's what I'm getting to. Over all of this, what I'm trying to say is that, like, we have to remember that there's something important to live for, right? And that for me, what's important to live for is to make sure people coming after me have what they need, my descendants, the young folk,
Yes. Yes. That we
right?
leave something really important. They're going to
Yeah,
need it.
yeah,
They're going
yeah,
to need those role models. They're going to need the elders who
yeah,
are maybe no longer in their human bodies,
right.
but through their work,
Yeah,
legacy, writings, and
mhm, yeah. And we're also really lucky too, because, like, we're these shamans, and as it's been revealed to me, like, one of my core experiences has been mediumship my whole life. I just didn't know that's what was happening. Like, I've
right.
always been in the spirit realm, right? And that's really like the heart, the main work of a shaman. We get identified as shamans because we have the capacity to move between worlds, right? And because of that, like, I understand that there's continuation.
Yes,
There's a whole
absolutely.
another world, right, beyond the physical world, right? And I'm like, oh, this is just transition is just continuation.
Yeah.
Moving from one state to another. The work is still the work.
The work is still the work. And also to know that many of us who are who are going to be the witnesses, to these systems collapsing, right? And
Mhm.
as we are in these, who are also mediums and magic makers and dream weavers, and like we're going to be asked to hold a lot of compassionate space
Yeah.
as we help people what is going to feel like everybody
Mhm.
like death, right?
Yeah.
Because even
Yeah.
letting go of I mean, even hanging on to your age, Rod, is a
Mm.
form of hanging on to an identity that's going.
Yes. Yes.
Right. That's why
Absolutely.
women fight so hard. It's like, no, I'm not going to let go of my 30-year-old body, even
Yeah.
though it's gone. It's like, it's
Yeah.
like I'm 50. It looks different.
Yeah.
It's just, it's
Absolutely.
just
Yeah.
not going to be the same. I mean, you can
Yeah.
force it, and that
Mhm.
takes labor, though. That's a lot of, and that's okay. But I guess the bigger point is also I'm really appreciating this conversation because I think we will need to demonstrate this
Mhm.
as community elders as we are getting to this
Mhm.
point of being okay. And that also reminds me of Dr. King. He
Yeah.
was very uncomfortable with death.
Mhm.
He
Yeah.
was like, he knew he was going to die. He
Yeah.
prophesied the day
Yeah.
before he died, his own imminent death. Like, and also anyone who was putting their bodies on the line during the civil rights movement, they were prepared to die.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
there's a kind of like, I think we're going to have to start teaching about this, um, but not in a way that makes people go out guns blazing or in a
Mm-hmm.
state of despair. See, there's
Mm-hmm.
that. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
die. Well, let's just blow it up.
True.
Because if
Very
people are
true.
doing that left and right, right?
Yeah.
Instead of just,
Yeah.
maybe ending their own life, they decide to go and end 30 other people on the
Yeah.
way, and
Yeah.
create. So there's just this liberation. It's a powerful time to be alive, right? To witness this. What I like about you is you have so much interest and fascination in this. It was like you really are made for these times, right?
Interesting.
Because you're just like watching, like, okay, and how's this gonna happen? And you're so fearless in it. I love that about
But don't
you.
you feel like you've been through this before, though?
Of course. Absolutely. There's a part that feels like I've been through this before. So it goes like this. Oh
Yeah.
no, we've been through this before. But obviously, I need to be
Yeah.
like, oh, yes, here we get to go through it again because there's more work to do. There's
Yeah.
other levels of freedom. We're part of this, collective karma. It's a global karma now, that we're
Yeah.
going to witness a kind
Yeah.
of systemic global
Mhm.
effect. Nothing just happens to
Right.
one place anymore. it's
Yeah.
it's um it's the butterfly effect,
Yeah.
just something happens over here, it triggers a tsunami over there. So
Yeah.
we know that's the case. So I think you see the glass like half full, and I'm like looking at it like, where's the rest of the water? It's empty. Here we go again down the rabbit hole.
I don't know. I think I would go even further than that and say
Okay.
I feel like the glass is really full.
Yes.
I feel like there's so much potential, and that's what
Okay.
excites me. That's what I'm
Yes.
seeing. This is why I don't have this doomsday approach to a lot of things,
Right.
because what I see, literally what I feel is flow. When I think about the future, I see continuation. I see flow. Right. How it's gonna flow through, who knows? But I don't see a stopping of the river. Like,
Right.
I see just a continuous down into whatever the depths, of this future is. And like, so I don't experience I don't experience hopelessness,
Yes.
but I also, what I have really, really trained hard to do for most of my life is to understand, like, suffering.
Yeah.
Right. And this is why I started practicing Buddhism. Like, I was just, and before Buddhism, like social change and racial justice work, I was like, why is this happening? Because this doesn't make sense. Right. And so everything has been about trying to unravel this so that I could figure out essentially what the medicine
Yeah.
is that I can offer. Like, I was like, okay, I need to figure out how to be in relationship to this, or else it becomes really easy to make it worse. And it's already worse. Right?
Well, I think that, yeah, I agree with you. But I think this is and I think in some way, this is what I had hoped, that when we talked about this, we could give a different perspective,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Name the current one of like, oh no, anxiety. And then also the
Mhm.
hope of how to hold this in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah.
There will be those that will suffer, and that hurts to
Mhm.
watch, and people suffer in confusion, just because of the systems are
Mhm.
so entrenched and woven into our cells. The systems are our identities. They're so, and as we
Mm.
cut them loose, as they collapse, it is that. And that's just the suffering that leads to the end of suffering. If we can just hold it together as a collective community, this grief that
Mhm.
for some people it doesn't have to be a bad thing to mourn the loss of one
Yeah.
thing. And that's also what I do get excited about, is the levels
Mhm.
of creativity
Yes.
that will
Yeah. Yep.
emerge in the arts and the writings and the communities. It will unleash and I just
Yeah.
don't even know,
I
just
mean,
waves of that
the
creative.
Spirit Underground, like the Spirit
Yeah.
Underground project, and like which we will announce, even maybe by the time of this
I
podcast
hope
coming
so.
out.
By November, it's gonna be a moment that whole
No,
month.
no, it's just like, yeah, like this is like, I'm seeing a lot of creativity. I'm seeing a lot of people returning back to land. And I mean, even for me, like so much, I have so many not so many, but like there are some really core interest areas that have really awakened for me that I'm saying, oh, I need to like learn this, because this is going to be important for the future, which for me feels exciting.
Yeah, because it's so different,
It's so
right? It's like
different.
a whole new like era for you,
Yeah.
like the land and the herbs and all these
Yeah. And the
different things and
growing and
growing
like,
plants
yeah,
and
I love it. Like, who ever thought, right? I think so many people are waking up like this, and also people are waking up to like actual, kind of like spiritual abilities, or sometimes I say spiritual technologies like
yes, you said
clairvoyance and
that.
divination and like people and healing. Like the people are just like waking up and going, shit, when did I learn how to do this? you know?
Yeah, alternative
Yeah,
healing modalities
yeah,
has just exploded in
yeah,
growth as people leave the medical system, right? I have all these friends, like our friend Dr. Debbie, who
yeah.
left a traditional trauma
Mhm.
nurse in a big hospital and opened up her own holistic.
I love it.
It's like that's just classic of the shift of like people think I could do this in a whole different way.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't have to be connected. I can trust my own power,
mhm,
as a healer to
yeah,
treat,
yeah.
to do OBGYN work in a totally different frame.
Yes.
It's exciting to see that.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
creativity is exciting because that's part of the new systems,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah, that's when we started abolishing, we actually started creating space and room for us to remember. And then once you start remembering, then you get to choose your labor instead of your labor being prescribed to you, right?
Yeah.
I think that's going to be, revolutionary for people to choose your labor. If you just want to grow food, you grow food. Like if you want to be, a healer, you do a healer. You want to make clothes, you make clothes. Like, instead of just doing things to make money, we choose our labor because it's how we express care
Yeah.
for
Right.
people.
We're
Yeah,
embodied again. And then
yeah,
we are able to
exactly.
choose from that deeper place of
Yeah,
our knowing.
yeah,
A lot of people
yeah.
don't even know what their gifts
Mm-mm,
are, right? It's a
mm-mm,
program defines you, categorizes you, and
mhm.
gives you the map, gives you your blueprint,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
A
yeah.
lot of people are waking up from that given blueprint,
Mhm,
and going, wait, what do I really? It's still happening, and
yeah.
I think especially in the South
Oh, absolutely.
and all over the world
Yeah,
where these
yeah,
systems are being challenged of
yeah.
patriarchal,
Mhm,
oppressive systems that are based in violence
mhm,
and um, there so for all those people
yeah.
out there in the world, like we're gonna get through this time.
Mhm,
And that's why I feel like our voices on these topics are so unique, Rod. And the
mhm.
conversations that we're going to be having for season 2, I feel like feeling really engaged in putting this out
Yeah.
now, like these
Oh, yeah.
technologies and whatever it is we're talking about, eldership or
Mhm,
mediumship and magic. We have an
mhm,
episode coming up on that on season 2.
mhm.
The whole world of psychedelics and plant medicine
Yeah.
with liberation. And then, of course, we'll be talking so much about our church and our
Yeah.
liberation project.
Mhm.
And okay, we're going to make it, Rod. You're the commander.
We're gonna make it. We are, like, and just again, for everyone listening, this is like, call in what you need. Like, call in the spiritual technologies, the spiritual capacities that you think you need, right? Start with that, right? And just open and see what happens. Like, very basic. If we can start doing that, then we're doing the work of disrupting these systems, right? So that's what we're doing, and upward and onward, as we used to say in the monastery, upward and onward.
And our fearlessness. That's the
Yeah,
last thing I'll end with. We all will have to find this
yeah.
deeper courage,
Hmm.
and I'm just excited to do that work. That also is work, So yeah,
Hmm.
onward and upward we
Yeah.
go, everybody. And
Mm.
thank you all for listening and supporting this podcast. And we'll be back with you real soon for a
Absolutely.
new episode.
All right.